Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube. Welcome back to my home streaming setup. I'm Adam Steele for Hot Pole Studios, and today we're going to talk about Melodyne, specifically Melodyne Assistant. Melodyne Assistant is one of the 4 versions of Melodyne that there are now. So let's quickly go over the differences. There's Melodyne Essential, which is the cheapest option, but as far as I'm concerned is essentially useless because it doesn't do much. Melodyne Assistant, which is this version here, which has all the features that I need to do things like vocal tuning. There's Melodyne Studio, there's Melodyne Editor is the third one, which is a lot more expensive and has polyphonic editing, and also you can put custom scales in, neither of which are something I need. And then there's Melodyne Editor, which is the big boy, which is a standalone program which you can transfer several kind of lanes of audio into, so you can do things like easily line up like backing vocals and things like that, which I've played with. It's kind of cool. This is exactly what I needed at the price point I needed it for. It's about €200, maybe $250. And compared to something like Auto-Tune, it's much more powerful, but the entire point is that the tuning is in your hands. Now, there are quite a few tools here, so I'm going to try and go through them all. But the first thing that we're going to do, this is the main vocal for this song that we're going to use today. And I've already transferred all the audio in, so rather than do that twice, I'm going to do it with the backing vocals, or at least one of the backing channels. I'm using Reaper, as you can see. And I'm just going to do one of the choruses. We're not going to labour the point and do the entire song. That would just be gratuitous because I'm trying to show you the software, not the song. So the first thing to do is in Reaper, and it's very similar in anything like Cubase, Pro Tools, whatever. I'm going to click in a blank insert space. I have to find Melodyne in my list. In this case, there is a filter in Reaper, so I just type Mel to get Melodyne. And I'm going to use the VST3 version of Melodyne. You can use DirectX, VST, VST3. I think there's an AX version as well for Pro Tools. I prefer using VST3 for Melodyne because it's very tightly linked to the playback in whatever DAW you're using, and as far as I'm aware, VST3 has a very tight integration with that. As far as I'm aware, there are no actual differences, but since Reaper supports both, I'm just going to go ahead and use VST3. Now that's opened up Melodyne Assistant. If I go back to Reaper, I'll close the Melodyne window for a second, you can see that Melodyne's at the bottom here. Now we need to change this because effects go in the order from top down. So everything that goes through an insert in Reaper goes from the first one to the second one, third one, fourth one. And what Melodyne needs to do is you need to transfer in the audio into Melodyne. And what happens there is that anything that's come before it then gets printed. That is to say, it's baked in, it's permanent, it can't be changed. Which can make Melodyne very limiting if you use it in the wrong place. So what I do is I grab Melodyne and I drag it to the very top so that it's the first plugin in the chain. That way anything that we do is done to the raw audio, and then anything from the output of Melodyne is then affected by anything like EQs, compressors, after the fact, so that anything that we have in the plugin chain is not then kind of locked out. Everything can still be changed, automated, whatever you want to do. So, let's hit play on this backing vocal.
Like rubies and diamonds, the jewel of the night.
Let's take off, there's quite a harsh kind of scoop in EQ because it's a backing vocal and a plate reverb. Let's remove them for now.
Like rubies and diamonds, the jewel
Now,
of the night.
up here you can see that the levels are going a little bit. It's not the loudest vocal in the world. I tend to track kind of -18 to -12 dB if I can, to try and match analog levels properly. Makes all your analog compressors and virtual compressors and all your insert points and everything behave as they should. Now let's make this window a little bigger so we can see what's going on. Now what we need to do is make sure that the playback in Reaper is just before the audio. Go back into Melodyne, hit the transfer button. You'll see the transfer light go red, Then we hit play and watch the levels go.
Like rubies and diamonds, the jewel of the Nile. I'm indestructible, forever fine. The heart of the ocean, larger than life. I'm monumental, forever mine.
So if I hit stop at this point, you can see what I call the Pie of Doom coming up. I've always called it that. I've been using Melodyne for a long time now. It just so happens that I used to use it in other people's studios, and now for Hot Pole Studios I've bought Melodyne 4, but I've used Melodyne 2 and 3, so I've been using it for best part of 10 years. And that Pie of Doom used to be a lot worse, but as you could see halfway through transfer, it started to work out that it was monophonic audio, and that it needed to start working out what notes are where. Now, you can see a lot of squiggles on the screen. These squiggles, going left to right, are time-based, and they're on a piano roll, much like kind of a MIDI piano roll. So if I was to play these on a piano, that would come out, and the big blocks are the notes that Melodyne has worked out that the singer or whatever instrument is trying to play. And the squiggle, the kind of detailed line inside of it, is what we call the modulation. That's kind of the fine. So if someone's got a vibrato on a voice, you can see, like here, there's quite a thick squiggle. You can see kind of jumps up in pitch. Sometimes Melodyne doesn't actually work out that they're separate notes, so we have to go in and do that. So this is where all the separate tools of Melodyne start to come in. So this, as you can see, it goes up, goes down, up and down again. If I hit play from the start of the phrase, watch it follow along.
Like rubies and diamonds, the jewel of the Nile. I'm indestructible.
So you can see how that's following the vocal, because it's a graphic representation of the vocal. Now let's go back to the main vocal, and we'll work on tuning the main vocal through an idiotic error of my own. You can see offlines here where I've brought the project home from the studio and I've seemed to have missed some audio. Again, completely my fault, but I transferred into Melodyne before that, so the audio is still here. The latest version of Melodyne seems to make a copy of the audio that's been transferred in the same folder as your project. So make sure you've saved your Reaper project or Pro Tools project, whatever project, before you do any of this transferring, so that all the audio goes to the right folder, so that when you come back to it, if you copy the folder, back it up, archive it, when you come back to it, it's all there. What used to happen is you used to have to define manually where the transfers went for Melodyne, and I've lost several albums worth of vocals to that, which is a real pain. I mean, the original files are still in Reaper here, so you never lose the original files, apart from in this case but that's because they're in another folder on another drive. But if I hit play on the main vocal for this same chorus,
Like rubies and diamonds, the jewel of the Nile.
what's happened here is that the singer, she's quite a good singer, but we were rushing her with new ideas, new variations, so it's a little bit pitchy. So, fear not. If I right click anywhere, by the way, that comes up with all the tools I'm going to need, all in a nice little row. So there's the main tool, and let's go to the end of the chorus, which is there. So in the main tool, there's the main tool which kind of selects things. There's the scroll tool which does the typical hand grab, move around thing. And then there's the zoom tool which does exactly what it says. You can dive into the notes, you can get more on screen, less on screen, depending on entirely how much of it you need to see. If you need to see a chorus, or maybe you just need to see 2 or 3 notes at a time if you're doing detail work. If you need to see 2 octaves, or maybe you just need to see 1. This makes that a little easier. Now, one of the first things that I do with a vocal is there's a button up top which is Correct Pitch Macro. Now, this is my first port of call when I'm correcting a vocal. If I click that, it gives me options for pitch center and pitch drift. If I've told the song what key we're in, if I've told Melodyne what key we're working in, it can actually lock everything to a specific key. I don't tend to do that myself because quite often songs will like modulate key and change at different points, and I like to be in control of that, so I just let it do things chromatically. If I move pitch center, that moves every note around. As you can see them all shuffling here, the ones that have been selected, and it moves them to what it thinks the note should be. It doesn't change the fine detail inside the notes, so the vibrato and that kind of thing, which is how you get Melodyne to sound relatively realistic. There are people who really kind of flatten things out in Melodyne and make it sound like a robot, and that was one of really a lot of the early Melodyne users would make that mistake of just ironing out the modulation, and that's why a lot of it sounded pretty pants. Now, the other selection is pitch drift. Now, this is, I find, a very clever thing. If you look inside some of the notes, especially like this one at the end, this is actually two different semitones, which I'm going to have to go and correct later. But if I move pitch drift, you see how they slowly become the same note? I often like to correct some pitch drift. Say if a singer's hit a note and then just slid a bit sharp or slid a bit flat, the pitch drift correction can very gently and quite subtly stop that from happening without losing the humanity of the note. I'm not a big fan of going 100% on that, although with pitch center that is what I do. So if I hit OK on this, let's listen back to this.
Like rubies and diamonds, the jewel of the know. I'm indestructible.
Okay, so not perfect, but it's done a lot of the work for us. Now, if I go to the main tool, I can just unselect everything by just clicking in a blank space and just follow the notes along.
Like rubies and diamonds.
So, let's move the playhead to here. This note is on pitch now, but it's got a lot of vibrato. So if we go to the pitch tool, we can move a note around. So if it was supposed to be a different note, or if we're experimenting, I've seen songwriters use this to kind of rewrite a vocal line, or to maybe synthesize a backing vocal by maybe copy pasting the main vocal and just moving all the notes around. And now by moving this pitch, I've moved it up a third. Watch what happens.
Rubies and diamonds, the jewel of the know.
It doesn't sound very natural on its own as an exposed vocal, and it probably wouldn't do. But maybe if Melodyne's detected that a note's a semitone up or down from where it should be, this is a good way of just pulling that right back down and going, no, you should be here. Also, there's a good source of amusement by just clicking and holding on any note with the pitch tool. It should sound like an excited sheep. I always find that amusing. The next part is the pitch modulation, and this is a really powerful bit. So if I drag this up, we'll get more vibrato,
Rubies and diamonds.
which of course I've gone crazy with it there. I've gone to nearly 300%. But if I back that up below 100%, but not all the way flat, we get quite a natural.
Rubies and diamonds, the jewel.
So there's still some fluttering in the vocal there, which is quite realistic, but it's not as much. If I was to go all the way to 0%, you'll suddenly get that kind of share effect. So listen to this.
Rubies and diamonds, the jewel of the know.
And you can hear, oh, that's really ironed it out, T-Pain style. And And I can actually go below 0% and have it go vibrato and inflection the wrong way, which is weird, but hey.
Rubies and diamonds, the jewel of...
Not sure why you'd use that, but the option's there. It's kind of cool. So let's leave it back on that kind of realistic thing. Now, the next bit is the Formant Tool. I don't tend to use the Formant Tool very much, but what you can do with that is you can make a voice sound higher or lower on a note than it actually was.
Rubies and diamonds, the jewel of...
Or maybe I could lift that back up.
Rubies and diamonds, the jewel of the...
So maybe you could use that subtly, say if you've got a singer that's just on a particular note, kind of gone no or me, and too far off a formant from what you wanted, but you can't get them back in. You can just subtly change things.
Rubies and diamonds, the jewel of...
Like there, I'm going to leave the formant a little up because it makes it sound a little more poppy than theatre. It just makes it sound like it's projecting out a little bit. Next one is the Amplitude Tool. This one is literally how loud it is. So if I make that super loud,
Rubies and diamonds,
or a bit quieter,
rubies and diamonds,
it's just a nice place to maybe control your volume levels note by note. I've known engineers to do this on a pop production to make everything really consistent before compression. Nice thing to do. It gives you that extra layer of control without having to automate anything other than something that you can see note for note, rather than having to chop a wave file up. It's quite nice. The Time Tool is quite a powerful thing. You can start to move the starts and ends of notes round. If I just drag the end of a note, by default it snaps to the time grid, which could be good for really locking things in. Like I've just moved the diamonds here,
rubies and diamonds, the
and it's moved one longer, but it's also shortened the other. Now it doesn't sound right to me. If I go into where am I looking? Options, time grid, and deactivate it. I like to have free control.
rubies and diamonds, rubies and diamonds, rubies and diamonds.
So if I just undo a few layers there. That can be really useful, and I use this quite a lot with backing vocals to make them perfectly line up if they weren't quite bang on. Yes, you can do that with VocalLine, but that's a different technique entirely. And maybe if you're using VocalLine and Melodyne, that's some serious processing right there. If it's only the odd note that was, if you don't want them to be robotically in, but there's the odd note that's just too far out, this is a nice way to do it. Underneath time, there's the time handle. Not entirely sure. I don't think I've ever actually used the time handle, to be honest. Yeah, not entirely sure what the time handle does. And then there's attack speed, which is you can make a note a little softer.
Rubies of the note,
Or you can make it a little more aggressive.
love the note, love the note, love the note.
And that changes the speed of a note within the note. If you see the modulation inside it moving around, it's quite artificial, but it gives you fine control. And then the last one for me is the note separation tool. This is quite important because if Melodyne doesn't detect two separate notes as two separate notes, if it thinks they're one, that can quite often cause real trouble. Like the best example is this note at the end of the chorus is actually two semitones, so it steps up. But Melodyne hasn't noticed that. Listen.
The mine.
So there's a key change in there, and you can see there's a little flick up where the note changes. So that should be, if we're in F sharp, that should be an E. Then we double click here to split on the exact point we want it to split, and you see how that's become 2 notes. I'll do that again just so you can see. If I split this with a double click here, it'll split there. So you have to be very precise. You can see on your modulation where you would want that note to change, and that's where I would do that. And then it's put the pitches back where they originally were. So I can double click each note on the pitch to snap it to the nearest note, and then I can put each one of the 2 notes where they should be. So this should now sound much better. One more thing that's now appeared while we're on the pitch tool is these yellow lines at the end of each note. That's kind of the transition time. So that's, if I make this transition really long, you'll hear a big long slide up from one note to the other, which can be quite theatrical, but easily controlled. If I go the other way and make that instant, that will just snap T-Pain style. Or at least closer to that. So if I make the modulation very low, so the modulation's almost nothing, and that transfer time is nothing, that will now sound like a robot. If I make this more human, there's still a step in there, but there's kind of a slide in there, so it sounds like it's transitioning from one note to the next. If I put the modulations back to something a bit more human, suddenly we've got something that's under control, a little bit artificial, sure, but also much more close. I mean, depending on the genre you're working in, whether it's natural or not may not be an issue. So let's just go through this chorus and just quickly, I'm going to go through and not talk too much and actually just correct everything here, so that hopefully you'll see me doing things, and then I'll talk through what I've done afterwards.
Like rubies and diamonds, the jewel. Like rubies and diamonds, the jewel. The jewel of the
split the note.
I'm indestructible. I'm indestructible, forever fine. The heart of the ocean, fine. The heart of the ocean, larger than forever fine. The heart of the ocean, larger than life. I'm monumental, forever mine.
Okay, so let's bring the music back and just hear this in context.
Rubies and diamonds, like rubies and diamonds, the jewel of the Nile. I'm indestructible, forever fine. The heart of the ocean, larger than life. I'm monumental,
one thing that I do want to fix now that I'm listening to the music, and that's
Forever, forever fine, forever fine, the heart of the ocean.
there. The timing on that, having worked with the original songwriter, should have been much straighter. It should have been da 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 da.
The heart of the ocean.
So let's look at the time tool and see. Oh, by turning off the time. Oh no, time grid's not active. Let's see if we can make this on bar and just into triplets.
The heart of the ocean. The heart of the ocean.
And see, just with a little intuition and a little practice, I've turned that from da 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 to
Fine, the heart of the ocean.
and I used this grid line here to see where that bar was and where that triplet hit the bar. So it's worth saying that a lot of what I'm doing here is much the same as you would do manipulating a piano roll. So some kind of musical training, or at least practice with editing on a piano roll, really does help with Melodyne. Being a musician helps, it really does. So if you think of this as editing a musical instrument rather than just a vocal, it will kind of open up mentally for you. Now we transferred in the backing vocal. Let's listen to these together. These should sound pretty terrible because the backing vocal's not been tuned and the main vocal has.
Like rubies and diamonds, the jewel of the Nile. I'm indestructible, forever fine.
Okay, so let's do the backing vocal before we finish so we can hear them together and we can play with the time tool a bit more using our ears. So, first thing to do, going rather quickly, is select everything. Go to the correct pitch macro, which is the bit, just to remind you, that saves you a lot of time by putting everything close to the nearest pitch, which quite often was the one that was supposed to be, and correcting the pitch drift again. Assuming that the singer was very close to what they were supposed to do in the first place, this can save you a lot of time. If the singer was way off, you're going to have to do this manually either way, so at least it just gets you close to a pitch, even if it's not the right pitch. I used to try and do this without the correct pitch macro, and it just takes longer. So at least this is some time saved. So let's listen to this.
Like rubies and diamonds.
Right, so technically speaking, this is in A major. Oh, what have I done? How do I tell this? You know, I've never actually set whether it should use a set key. Let's just try this macro with it's detected it's A major. Let's see if that makes a difference.
Like rubies and diamonds, the jewel of the Nile. I'm indestructible.
So that has helped there. Let's just try. Nice. Pitch grid chromatic snap. Yeah, so I like to use things in chromatic modes because that just moves me to the nearest semitone rather than making the assumption that I'm in a particular scale, which I find useful because sometimes if there is a modulation or an accidental note or something that's meant to be out of key, it makes it easy for me to just put that where it's supposed to be and not have to fight the system. So let's zoom in a little bit.
Like rubies and diamonds. Like rubies and diamonds.
So that should be.
Like rubies and diamonds. The jewel of the Nile.
So Melodyne's detected this as one note. So now if we make it two, we can nudge that first bit down.
The Nile. indestructible. I'm indestructible.
See, again, it's detected this as one note, and this is one of the most common things that I find with Melodyne.
I'm indestructible forever.
Yeah, characteristic flicks in a vocal style can end up coming across as a single note of mush, so you've got to be quite careful with your own editing style that you're aware that the singer was doing some sort of vocal acrobatics, and make sure that you physically tell Melodyne that that's the case.
Oh, forever fine, the heart of the ocean.
See, that big jump there is where the singer's done a kind of a blast, and I'm going to leave that as it is. Sometimes that kind of character can be better left in, but if you notice that even though it says here that the overall pitch isn't right, the modulation goes up and hits the right pitch before going again, which to my ears at least makes it sound right.
Oh, forever fine, the heart of the ocean, larger than life,
That should be...
than life.
That's the point. When we were editing this is me redoing this, by the way. I've already done this for the client. I'm doing this again for the video. The life here on the backing vocal, we decided should, instead of going second and third, should go third, fourth. And we just moved it in Melodyne. And we decided that this should be a louder note. So I just bump up the amplitude. Because the chord underneath it, if I clear the solo, that changes it then from a major seventh to the root of the chord being quite loud and proud, which gives it that big high note in the song. And again, it was something we decided after the singer had already gone several hundred miles away and there was no way to bring it back. So again, where those notes sound weak, they're not actually weak. It's just that Melodyne thinks it's one note, so it's tried to kind of homogenise them. So that should be there. And that should be a lot closer. That shouldn't be zero modulation, like we were saying, that would be robot style, but if we hit play on this, the slide there is interfering with the main vocal, so I'm usually a bit more harsh and a bit more aggressive with taking some of the modulation out of backing vocals than I am main vocals, because the main vocal to me should have character, but a backing vocal can be carried by the main vocal, so it needs to not interfere. Cool. So now, in context, we just have to look at the timing of this and make sure that they're right. There's one. If we listen to the time, the main vocal goes on longer than the backing vocal. So, turn our time grid off and just make that longer. And let's see if we can get this. They're a bit off. what I'm going to do here is I'm going to separate the silence out of this note, because otherwise it moves the next note along with the timing. So I'm just going to make this note longer and leave the silence a bit shorter. And they are now relatively tight between a chorus and a backing vocal, and they're in tune. Now, in a full mix, I've got a double-tracked backing vocal, so I would go through Melodyne again on another channel. Then I've got more backing vocals, so I do this layer by layer, and that's how I'd get it to sound like a modern pop production. But for the purposes of this tutorial, you can hear how I've made two vocals kind of mesh together. Admittedly they're in mono at the moment, but I would have the stereo panning going on the backing vocal, all that kind of stuff. But one more time. And without Melodyne? Point, I don't have the original vocal there. But anyway, you can hear how that's made such a huge difference. So, that in a nutshell is how to use Melodyne for Assistant, and good luck to all of you. So, I hope you found this useful. If you did, please subscribe to the channel, because that really helps us out. We've just hit 5,000 subscribers, and that really means a lot, and we need everybody to subscribe, even if you don't watch most of the videos, just so that we can go to other companies and go, hey, we're these guys, let us review your gear, let us do an interview with you, yada 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 yada. So, thanks for watching, and if there's anything in particular that you'd like to see us covering, let us know in the comments as well, because comments help us. They help us to guide our script writing and what we're going to talk about. And we'll see you all in the next video. Cheers. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our other videos, as you can find here, or check out our Facebook and Twitter, or our Patreon page, which helps us to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.